The sun shone tirelessly in the Florida sky, painting the huge water park golden, where children and adults lost themselves in laughter and joy. It was a hot summer day with the heat making the park's waters more inviting than ever. The sound of laughter and excited screams echoed through the colorful trails surrounded by trees that formed a veritable oasis. But among the shadows of the giant water slides and wave pools, something dark was beginning to take shape. Something no one could have predicted. Natalie was a 28-year-old professional diver, and the ocean was her second home. Since she was a child, she had been fascinated by the sea. Growing up on the beaches of Miami, she took her first steps on the golden sands and her first strokes in the deep, salty water. Throughout her life, she developed a unique connection with nature, especially with the creatures that inhabited the depths of the sea. The sea had always been her refuge, the place where she felt most alive, most connected. Over time, Natalie became an expert in marine animal rescue. Her skill in handling wild creatures such as sea turtles and even sharks was recognized worldwide. But as much as her career was marked by a constant search for adventure and understanding the behavior of the most dangerous animals on the planet, she never stopped wondering about the limits of human curiosity. The ocean, with its beauty and mysteries, also hid deadly dangers, and Natalie knew that very well. It was with this spirit of passion and respect for marine life that she received the offer to star in a new exhibit at a Florida water park, one of the most visited in the United States. The concept was daring to create an immersive experience where visitors could observe sharks up close in a safe environment. As a diving expert, Natalie would be responsible for demonstrating the incredible abilities of these marine predators and helping visitors better understand these animals feared by many. When the offer came, Natalie was at a stage in her life where she was looking for something new. Her routine of rescues and underwater expeditions was leaving her exhausted. The job at the park would be a change of scenery, a respite from her professional life. She also knew that her participation in the exhibition would bring incredible visibility to her work and to the cause she championed, educating the public about the importance of preserving sharks and other marine creatures. However, something didn't feel right. As she reviewed the details of the proposal, a strange feeling of discomfort washed over her. It wasn't the job or the opportunity that bothered her, but what she felt deep down in her soul. It was a vague feeling, something like a premonition, a voice whispering to her that maybe this wasn't the right time to be there in that place, but she tried to push those thoughts away. The job would be a unique chance to show the public the true nature of sharks, dispelling the irrational fear people had of these majestic creatures, and it was a rare opportunity for her. On the morning of her debut at the park, Natalie was getting ready for the event, putting on her diving suit. The dressing room was simple but functional. The smell of neoprene and the sound of diving suits being adjusted were familiar and comforting. She looked at herself in the mirror and did a final check of her outfit, adjusting her mask and fins. Her reflection showed a confident woman, but something still weighed on her. "Everything will be fine, Nat," said Jimmy, her assistant and longtime friend. He accompanied her on her expeditions and rescues and knew exactly how she worked. His smile was genuine, but his eyes betrayed a certain concern. "Yeah, let's hope everything goes well," replied Natalie with a smile that, however forced, tried to hide her uneasiness. She took a deep breath, trying to calm down. When she arrived at the event venue, a large crowd had already gathered near the central aquarium where the show would take place. The place was stunning, with crystal-clear waters and huge tanks where sharks swam elegantly as if they were kings of the marine kingdom. The audience was excited, eagerly waiting to see the sharks up close, but there was also a strange feeling in the air. Something seemed out of place, as if the environment was about to change. The technical team was adjusting the lights and cameras for the big attraction, and the sound of water being filtered and pumps running created a mysterious atmosphere. It was as if the park itself was breathing, preparing for the culminating moment of the event. In the background, Natalie watched the aquarium where the sharks were beginning to swim. The shadows of their large figures moved gracefully under the water, but she felt a growing tension. "It's time, Natalie. Let's go," Jimmy called her, interrupting her thoughts. She hesitated for a second, but then took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance of the tank where the show would begin. The water was cold and inviting, but what she didn't know was that behind the tranquility of that moment, something much darker was about to happen. Something that would forever change her view of the sea and marine life. As she took her first steps into the water, a chill ran down her spine, but she ignored it. The cameras were rolling, the audience was silent, and the sharks were ready for their big show. But something deep inside her told her that this would not be a simple presentation. The ocean was about to claim its prey. Can I continue with the next part? If so, let me know and I'll continue with the next part. You said yes. ChatGPT said part 2, The Encounter with Danger, 5,000 characters. The cold water touched her skin, and Natalie immediately felt the contrast with the heat of the sun still beating down on her head. She was ready, or at least she tried to convince herself of that. The lights around the large aquarium flashed brightly, highlighting the sharks that now swam in calm circles, as if accustomed to human presence. It was a spectacle, but not just any spectacle. It was a demonstration of trust between humans and the most feared creatures in the ocean. Natalie walked slowly into the water, her movements precise and natural, acquired through years of training and experience. She knew the shark's behavior well, and knew that the key to avoiding danger was calmness and respect. Her eyes scanned the aquarium, following the shark's movements as she began to give her first explanations to the audience. Sharks, although often misrepresented, are fascinating animals and essential to the balance of the oceans, she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. They are predators, yes, but they are also victims of a huge number of myths that surround them. The audience was mesmerized. Children and adults watched with their eyes fixed on the large animals as Natalie continued to explain, keeping a safe and respectful distance. However, as she moved around the tank, the feeling that had been bothering her grew stronger. She could sense the sharks around her, but she didn't see them as a threat. After all, she was there to show them up close to the public. Nevertheless, feeling of unease was taking hold of her. That's when she noticed something out of place. The largest shark in the tank, an imposing tiger shark, began to move away from the group. Its behavior was strange, more aggressive, more erratic. Natalie frowned and looked at Jimmy, who was outside the pool watching intently. He made a discreet gesture with his head, signaling that he was seeing what she was seeing. The shark no longer seemed calm like all the others. He's different, Natalie murmured to herself, the feeling she had felt earlier now turning into a sense of alertness. The tiger shark swam in circles, its gaze fixed and unsettling. The water around it seemed more agitated, as if it could sense the change. It was closer to Natalie, and although she knew these animals did not attack without reason, something about the way it moved made her question the safety of her surroundings. She knew she should remain calm and continue with the show, but the pressure in her chest increased with every passing second. The other people in the audience were absorbed in the presentation, unaware of what was happening. The crowd was still smiling and taking pictures, but there was something about the shark's behavior that seemed off. The tiger shark rose to the surface and passed very close to Natalie, its massive body reflecting the light from the lamps as its eyes fixed on her. That's when the tension broke. In an unexpected move, the tiger shark spun around and lunged toward the area where Natalie was standing. The sound of the water splashing was drowned out by the screams of the audience, who finally realized what was happening. The shark, in a sudden act of aggression, hit the invisible barrier separating the diver from the audience. The water became cloudy, and the pressure in the pool seemed to increase as Natalie tried to move away. But the shark continued to advance, dragging the water with its force. "Natalie, get out of there!" Jimmy shouted, already moving toward the pool. Natalie turned, quickly, panic beginning to set in. She had never imagined that one of the sharks would act that way. Normally they were calmer, more indifferent to human presence, but this one was different. The shark's fins beat furiously against the water, and its body moved with frightening force. The water around her began to thicken, and Natalie, trying to maintain control of the situation, swam quickly away from the threat. She knew she had to stay calm, but her reflexes began to be challenged by the intensity of the situation. The shark continued to approach, and now the distance between her and the sea monster was decreasing. the audience now aware of the chaos, unfolding before their eyes began to scream, but Natalie was still focused, concentrating on escaping the shark's deadly trajectory. Jimmy from outside was preparing to try to act quickly, but time was running out. The shark was heading toward her, and suddenly Natalie felt pressure on her leg. She tried to pull away with a quick kick, but it was too late. The shark had bitten. The pain was intense, and the water which had seemed so calm before was now filled with the sound of her heavy breathing. Natalie screamed not out of fear, but from the force of the attack. It was as if the ocean itself was testing her endurance. The impact was brutal, but Natalie knew she couldn't give up. She fought the animal with all her might. Meanwhile, the lights around the pool began to flash, as if the park itself was reacting to the chaos. Red water began to spread in circles around Natalie, and the people in shock watched without knowing what to do. Jimmy was there, but time was against them. Panic spread through the crowd like wildfire. The audience, which moments before had been enchanted by Natalie's peaceful display with the sharks, was now in shock, screaming and trying to understand what was happening. Some ran to the sides, others tried to film the incident with their cell phones, and chaos took over the entire park. Security guards tried to act quickly, but the sight of the scene was too terrifying for any immediate reaction. In the water, Natalie felt the pain running through her leg. The shark's attack had been stronger than she had imagined. She tried to get away, but the shark's strength was immense. The animal, with its predatory instinct, did not seem willing to give up. Its bite was fierce, and the animal, now more agitated, began to pull her down as if trying to take its prey into the depths. "No!" Natalie screamed, her voice muffled by the water. She tried to pull her leg back, but the shark was still there, its teeth sunk deep into her flesh. Her vision, already blurred by pain and pressure, tried to focus, but she felt her muscles beginning to give way. She knew she had to stay calm, that her only chance of survival was to act quickly and precisely. The lessons she had learned over the years about shark behavior were now becoming her guide. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't free herself from the force of the bite. The shark began to pull violently, and she felt her body being dragged into the darkness at the bottom of the tank. The fear Natalie had felt at the first sign of danger now turned into a fight for survival. She still couldn't believe what was happening. How could an animal she considered her ally, a shark she had worked with several times before, have become such an immediate and brutal threat? Blood began to spread through the water, staining the deep blue of the pool a bright red. What had once seemed like a safe environment was now becoming a battlefield where Natalie's life was at stake. "Jimmy!" she shouted again, now with more urgency. Her body was getting weaker by the second, the pain in her leg making her unable to focus fully. She didn't know if he had heard her, but she knew that time was against her. If he didn't get there in time, her chances of survival were rapidly diminishing. Jimmy outside was paralyzed for a moment, incredulous at what he was seeing. The sound of panic around him brought him back to reality. He shouted to the security guards and the rest of the team, asking them to bring the rescue tools. But he knew this wasn't something that could be resolved quickly. The speed with which the shark had attacked and the violence with which it was pulling Natalie were alarming. He looked at the tank and saw the shadows of the shark, which was still there, circling with the intensity of a hungry hunter. The team began to move, but rescue operations in aquatic environments are extremely complicated, especially when it comes to a shark on the attack. The security guards were trying to use nets and other equipment to ward off the animal, but the shark was moving too fast, making it difficult to get close. In the water, Natalie felt increasingly weak. She tried with all her remaining strength to cling to the walls of the tank, trying to escape the shark's bite. But with every movement, the animal seemed to react more aggressively, pulling her deeper. The sounds of the water slapping around her were muffled, but she could hear the sound of her desperate breathing, her chest heaving for air. The moment seemed eternal. "No, I'm going to die," thought Natalie, as the pain in her leg became unbearable. She could no longer tell where the blood was spreading and where the water began. The shark's movements were calculated, like a predator who knows its prey can no longer escape. Then she felt a sudden tug on the line of her wetsuit. Jimmy had gotten closer, finally managing to reach part of the tank. He was there, reaching out his hand, and with the help of one of the security guards, he managed to pull her to the surface. But the shark was still there, circling like a hungry spectre. The scene was chaotic. The security guards were trying to ward off the shark with nets, while Jimmy, now at the edge of the pool, pulled with all his might. The water around Natalie was stained red, and her vision was blurred by pain and panic. She felt that time was running out, but help had arrived. With one final effort, Jimmy managed to pull her out of the pool. Natalie was quickly taken to the edge where paramedics were already waiting. But as she was pulled from the water, a scream of terror echoed throughout the area. The tiger shark, as if unwilling to give up its prey, lunged forward again, slamming violently against the barriers of the tank. The emergency team was there, but the damage was already done. Natalie, bleeding and weak, looked out at the sea, at the ocean that had always fascinated her, and that at that moment had tested her like never before. The pain was intense, but she was still alive, and that in itself was a miracle. As Natalie was pulled out of the danger zone, the shark continued to swim restlessly. The tension was palpable, and everyone present felt the gravity of the moment. What had started as an educational demonstration had now turned into a nightmare. There was a sudden rush. Chaos took over the water park in a matter of seconds. As Natalie was dragged to the edge of the pool, her eyes still blurred by pain, and panic searched for something familiar. She saw flashes of the emergency team running toward her, but her vision was blurry, and the world seemed to spin around her. Her body, now weak and bloody, did not respond as it should, and she felt a sense of impending faintness. But she knew she had to fight, that she needed to stay conscious for what was to come. Help was there, but it wasn't enough yet. The biggest battle was just beginning. Jimmy was agitated, his face pale as snow, but he was still focused. He crouched down next to Natalie, trying to stay calm as the paramedics arrived. He knew that time was crucial, and that every second lost could be fatal. "Stay with me, Natalie, you're almost there. Just hang in there a little longer." His voice was hoarse, but he tried to sound confident. Meanwhile, on the other side of the tank, the tiger shark was still swimming furiously, slamming against the glass barriers that separated the animals from the humans. But the shark's strength was immense. The water seemed to shake with each blow, as if the tank itself would break at any moment. The shark was in a frenzy, and this did not go unnoticed by the authorities. The tension in the air was palpable, and the crowd, now in a panic, ran away from the aquarium area, seeking shelter and trying to understand what was happening. The water park security guards, initially disoriented, began to take emergency measures. Nets were thrown into the water, and a group of water safety experts tried unsuccessfully to lure the shark away from the area. But the animal did not seem to want to retreat. It continued to swim aggressively, visibly irritated by the human presence. Panic spread as visitors began to move away, but the situation was far from under control. "We need a full evacuation," shouted the head of security, pointing to the area around the tank. The tension was evident in his voice. He knew he was dealing with a situation that could become much more serious. Meanwhile, Natalie was being attended to by paramedics. They worked quickly, placing her on a stretcher and trying to stem the flow of blood from her leg. But the pain was unbearable, and the feeling of disorientation only increased. The park lights began to flicker, creating an almost surreal effect. The sound of water hitting the glass and people screaming mixed together in a cacophony of panic. The air seemed thick, heavy with the gravity of the situation. Every second that passed without an effective response made the threat seem greater. The entire park was being evacuated, but there were still people inside the danger zone. Some, in a panic, tried to run to the emergency exits, while others were paralyzed, unable to react to the chaos. Jimmy, trying to stay calm, stood next to Natalie, pressing the compress firmly against her wounded leg. He knew that every second they gained was saving her life, but he felt that the situation was about to spiral out of control. The shark was no longer acting like an animal that felt threatened. It seemed more like a force of nature, unaware of any other being around it. The park was lost in chaos, and it didn't take long for the local authorities to be called. A police helicopter arrived quickly, and the first rescue unit was positioned ready to do whatever was necessary. "We need to stabilize her now," shouted a paramedic as he checked Natalie's vital signs. She was beginning to lose consciousness, But she was still breathing, there was still hope. The tiger shark, now even more furious, made the glass of the tank vibrate with every movement. The crowd was retreating, but the terror was still palpable. Inside the aquarium, the other sharks, now agitated by the erratic behavior of the largest among them, swam rapidly in circles. Chaos was widespread, and the scene resembled an unpredictable storm. Outside, security guards were trying to control the situation, but the magnitude of the incident was beyond anything they had planned for. They needed a quick solution. The decision was made: direct intervention. Restraint equipment was brought in, and an emergency net was prepared to capture the shark, but not before the water park was completely closed and all visitors were evacuated to safety. Meanwhile, attention turned to Natalie. She was beginning to lose consciousness, her eyes heavy and her body shaking with pain. Paramedics continued to work frantically, but the lights of life were beginning to fade. She knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The shark could be neutralized, but the consequences of this attack would be profound, and its repercussions would extend far beyond that park. The sound of sirens mingled with the clamor of the crowd. The horror knew no bounds, and the minutes passed like hours. The park was in ruins both physically and emotionally. The damage was not limited to the attack itself, but to the sense of lost security. Nature, with all its unpredictability, had manifested itself in a brutal way, and no one there was prepared for the truth unfolding before their eyes. The days following the attack were marked by an avalanche of unanswered questions. The media was all over the case, and investigations began immediately. What had once been a paradise of fun and leisure had turned into a minefield of controversy, accusations and investigations. The water park, which for years had been synonymous with happiness and tranquility, now found itself at the epicenter of a tragedy that would shake the confidence of many. Natalie, after being rescued and rushed to the hospital, underwent a series of surgeries and intensive care. The shark bite had caused severe damage to her leg, and the fight for survival was real. She was out of immediate danger, but her recovery would be long and painful. Meanwhile, the world outside seemed to have collapsed on the park. At the hospital, the medical team worked to stabilize her, but the media pressure on the case was immense. Cameras were lurking, trying to capture any information that could shed light on what really happened. A sense of helplessness hung in the air. The tiger shark, which until then had been seen as a curiosity, was now the villain of the story. Local authorities launched a thorough investigation. The water park was closed immediately, and an audit process was initiated. What investigators soon discovered was that there were flaws in the safety protocol. The tank where the sharks were kept, although designed to be safe, did not have the proper safety checks in place to ensure that a tiger shark, one of the largest and most aggressive species, could not behave unexpectedly as happened with Natalie. The first question raised was about the safety of park employees and the adequacy of emergency procedures. Why were the staff unable to react more quickly? The attack was so sudden and violent that most of the divers and security guards did not know how to respond effectively. In addition, questions arose about the adequacy of staff training in dealing with large sharks and how to manage risky situations, something that appeared to have been neglected. Meanwhile, the park's public image suffered a devastating blow. Protests began to erupt outside the facility. Animal rights groups, along with environmentalists and people concerned about the welfare of sharks, demanded an immediate response. What began as an entertainment and shark awareness event quickly turned into a debate about ethics and responsibility. Some argued that sharks should never be kept in captivity for entertainment, especially with such a high risk involved. The public also began to question the safety of tourists and the general population. What more could have been done to prevent such a tragedy from occurring? The park, once a place of joy and fun, was now viewed with suspicion. The investigations took on huge proportions, with journalists, activists, and even politicians taking a stand on what had happened. The pressure on those responsible for the park was immense. As the investigations intensified, the victims' families began to speak out. Natalie, although still recovering, was already the center of much public discussion. She received support from fans and followers, but there was also growing pressure for her to take a stand on the attack and the measures she believed should be taken. She was torn. On the one hand, her love for the ocean and sharks remained intact, but on the other, she could not ignore the horror of what had happened. The moral dilemma consumed her. The pain in her leg was only part of her suffering. She felt a mixture of grief for the loss of something she loved so much, for the lost trust in the underwater world, and also for the struggle to find purpose amid it all. She didn't want her tragedy to be used solely to generate discussion, but she also felt that the conversation needed to happen. Something had to change, and responsibility could not be swept under the rug. At the center of it all was the water park, which was pressured to provide clear answers about what had happened. Those responsible for managing the site began to introduce a series of corrective measures to try to restore public confidence. Changes to safety protocols were announced, with the promise of more rigorous training for employees and a complete review of the animal containment systems. However, the response seemed insufficient to many. The investigation into the procedural failures continued to be a hot topic. Animal behavior experts were called in to explain what could have caused the tiger shark's sudden aggression. Some suggested that the animal was hungry or stressed, while others believed that the confined environment could have altered its behavior in unexpected ways. The issue of shark captivity itself was raised, with many arguing that for the safety of both animals and humans, they should not be kept in such a restricted environment. The debate over the ethics of displaying sharks and other marine animals to the public intensified. The following weeks were filled with uncertainty. The park faced an image crisis that would affect its finances for years. Public reactions were polarized, with some defending the idea that the incident was an isolated tragedy, while others saw the event as a reflection of the irresponsible exploitation of wildlife for commercial purposes. Natalie, although recovering, became increasingly active on social media, sharing her views on the tragedy and what she believed should be done to prevent something like this from happening again. She had become the voice of a larger cause fighting for worker safety and animal protection. As authorities investigated and the park tried to recover, Natalie knew that nothing would ever be the same. The attack not only shook the marine entertainment industry, but also transformed the way the world viewed ocean creatures. The tiger shark, once seen as a wonder of the underwater world, was now branded a symbol of a great human mistake. As time passed, the shock and pain of the tragedy began to fade, but the scars left behind could not be erased so easily. Natalie, still recovering, began to reflect on everything that had happened. The images of the shark bite, the sound of glass shattering with each blow from the animal, and the excruciating pain of being dragged to the bottom, all of it swirled in her mind like an endless storm. She felt she had lost more than just her physical health. She had lost her confidence, her faith in the ocean, and even in those she loved most. She had never imagined that a shark, a creature she had so much respect for, would become a symbol of something much greater, a human tragedy. But while she was immersed in this sea of doubt, a part of Natalie knew she had to move on. The lessons learned through suffering, though bitter, were necessary for the world to finally hear what she had to say. The ocean, with all its beauty and mystery, was being misunderstood. What had happened was not the animal's fault, but the fault of the circumstances that had placed it in a confined environment where it could not express its nature in the healthiest way. It was a reflection of what happens when humanity, with its eternal curiosity and desire to control everything around, it exceeds the limits imposed by nature. Natalie became part of a campaign to educate the public about respect for the ocean and marine animals. In her lectures, she talked about how humans often treat nature as a spectacle, forgetting that respect must be mutual. What happened to her was not a mere accident. It was a wake-up call, a brutal reminder that we cannot play with the forces of nature nor try to tame them without considering their needs and limits. Natalie's words resonated in her community, and little by little she began to be seen as a defender of the rights of sharks and marine animals. But she also became a symbol of overcoming adversity. Her suffering did not break her but transformed her. She knew that although the shark was the cause of the attack, it was not the villain of the story. The real enemy was human ignorance and selfishness. It was not the sharks that were wrong, but the system that forced them to live in captivity for commercial purposes without respecting their true nature. The tragedy, however, would not be without consequences. The water park faced heavy fines and a considerable decline in popularity. Investigations revealed serious safety flaws and mistreatment of the sharks. Some of the sharks were removed and relocated to marine sanctuaries, while others were released back into their natural habitat, where they could live in freedom. But the damage to the park's image was irreparable. Not only was visitor confidence lost, but there was also a growing recognition that the exploitation of wild animals for entertainment should no longer be tolerated. The debate over the captivity of sharks and other marine species gained momentum, with several NGOs and animal rights movements taking Natalie's attack as a clear example of how animal confinement laws and practices needed to be reviewed. Society as a whole gradually began to rethink its relationship with marine animals, understanding that they were not just attractions in theme park exhibits, but living beings with fundamental rights and needs. Natalie, in her journey to recovery, found a new reason to live. She knew she could never go back to the way she was before, but she also knew that the tragedy had given her the opportunity to inspire the world to change. She began traveling to international conferences, lectures, and scientific meetings, where she advocated for the preservation of sharks' natural habitat and an end to the confinement of marine species. She became an active voice, an example of resilience and adaptation. Although the wounds were still there, deep and uncomfortable, she refused to let fear and pain define her. However, the emotional pain of being attacked by a creature she had always respected never completely disappeared. In her moments of deepest reflection, Natalie wondered if this was a lesson from the universe. What did the shark really represent to her? A symbol of untamed nature, and at the same time of human fragility in the face of the forces of the earth and the sea. Throughout her recovery, she concluded that the shark, like all living beings, was a metaphor for the constant struggle for survival, the struggle for balance between man and nature, where both are equally vulnerable. Natalie's story of the shark attack and the fight for justice and understanding has left an indelible mark on history. Not just because she had survived, but because her experience brought to light an important reflection. How far can humans go in trying to explore the unknown, and how much does nature need to be respected in its true essence? The shark, now more than ever, was seen not only as a predator, but as a victim of human curiosity, which sometimes goes beyond the limits of what is ethically right. The moral of Natalie's story was not just about courage or pain, but about respect. Respect for nature, for the creatures that inhabit the planet, and perhaps most importantly, respect for the limits that life imposes on us. The sea, with all its mystery and beauty, must be respected, as must all living beings that inhabit it. They, like us, deserve space to live in peace. The ocean continued to sing its silent song, full of secrets and wonders, waiting for humans to learn to respect it before. The price of ignorance was once again paid with lives.